Before we get started, can I just see a show of hands? How many in the audience are entrepreneurs? Great. Okay, that's a lot. And how many are currently or about to raise venture capital? Any in the market now? Okay, a few. All right, we'll talk about what you're looking for in founders. But I want to start out. So GV has done 350 deals, $4 billion of assets under management, including companies like Stripe, who we just heard from, Slack, Uber. Jess, you joined 9 months ago, but it was actually not your first time joining GV. You were at Twitter, you went there briefly, you went back to Twitter, now you're at GV, hopefully for a long time. But before that, you started your career in venture many, many years prior at Venrock. So let's just start by talking about what has changed, your second time around as a VC, what has changed in the time period from when you started your career many years ago to today?
Yeah.
The biggest thing you noticed.
Well, thank you for joining me on stage. Thank you all for joining this morning, and to Startup Grind for having me. So if we rewind the clock about a decade ago, when I started my career as an associate at a venture capital firm, we were in a climate that is almost the exact opposite of what's going on right now.
Okay, how?
This was when the public markets were crashing, some of the investment banks were going under, and there was a real skepticism about what this next chapter of technology looked like.
That was RIP good times,
This was
Sequoia.
literally RIP good times. There were, LPs were hesitant to put a bunch of money into venture as an asset class because it was locked up for so long. And venture truly was still a cottage industry, and working at a startup was sort of like strange. Like, why would you, when I left that venture firm to join a startup, people thought I was crazy. But you fast forward 10 years from now, and the whole industry has really matured and grown up. That's partially because there's so much capital now flowing into venture. I think there's $100 billion last year went into the US venture financing market. To compare that, the year prior, it was like 30% growth, and a decade ago it was like $20 billion. But as a result, the psychology of our whole industry is changing.
Interesting.
So we went from, thinking of ourselves as the underdogs and this like small ecosystem that existed in San Francisco, and this is the way I felt at Twitter when I was an early employee, to now waking up a decade later, and our industry is shaping the whole globe. And many of these small companies are now among like the biggest in the world, having an impact in all sorts of different ways. And that means we need to change the way we think about our leadership too, and change the psychology from it's us as the underdogs to, in some cases, it's us as the powerful or the institutions that have to think more broadly about how we build and grow these companies and how we finance them.
Absolutely. So what does that mean for you as a VC investor? I mean, it means there's a lot more competition for the best deals.
100%. So we're in an ecosystem now with an abundance of capital, and that means many of you, as you finance your companies, will hopefully have a lot of choice in who you partner with. And so I think for those of us on the investing side, we have to differentiate, and we have to be able to show up to meet founders and hopefully be able to say, here's how I want to help you. Here's how I want to partner with you as you build your company. I built my career on the operating side, so for me, that's a lot about the experiences of building a company. You'll meet other investors who have founded companies. You'll meet folks that have a finance background for later stage investing. But for me, it's really about bringing the lessons I learned at Twitter, scaling that company into this seat as I now partner with founders.
You talked about this idea of taking responsibility. The tech industry needs to take responsibility because we're not just, I guess they are not just underdogs, they are powerful. So how does that translate down to the early stage startup who is just starting out, just trying to survive, just trying to raise that next round of capital?
100%. Many of you in the audience may be thinking, okay, but I'm like just trying to build this product. I have 3 employees. I can't solve all of the world's problems, and that's okay. And that's not just on you. I think this is where it really matters who you partner with. And I would encourage I would encourage you to make this an active dialogue with the investors, whether it's VCs or angel investors you bring into the company, and start to think about those value systems early. So start to think about, hey, we want to build, recruiting and hiring is our #1 priority. And we have a network from the schools we went to and the people we currently know, but we'd like to broaden that network and meet people from different backgrounds, of different demographic profiles, and finding investors and others to partner with you early to build a diverse and inclusive culture in your company. So a lot of this, I think, frankly, the VCs and investors like myself should be carrying more of this workload, because that we're in a different position in terms of resources and partnering with founders to help them on that journey.
I mean, today, where is that coming from? Is it our startups coming to you saying, listen, these are the issues that we care about and we want to think about this early on? Or is that coming from venture capitalists who are saying, no, you need to think about this because otherwise you could have an Uber situation on your hands when it's like, way too late to be dealing with these issues?
I think it's a little bit of both. I had a conversation the last couple of weeks with someone building a company in the gig economy and building a marketplace that helps people find incremental income through doing different jobs. And we were talking about how you get liquidity in that marketplace, and we were talking about the product and the competition and all the core parts of the business. We also talked about how do you build this company in a way that provides more economic opportunity for hourly based professionals who might be economically vulnerable. And he actually asked me in that conversation, he said, I'm curious where some of these questions come. Do you feel like you made missteps in the context of other things you worked on? And I said, I'm trying to take the lessons we learned at Twitter and incorporate some of this thinking of we should have been asking these questions earlier on in the company's growth. And what I learned in that conversation with that founder is he was delighted to talk about that stuff. He was delighted to think, oh, I like to have a partner that wants to grapple with these questions early and help us bake this value system into the company very early on. So for me, that's how it manifests in these, it's just a part of the conversation that we're having with companies.
Interesting. And so is that something that's increasingly common, and are the issues common across a number of companies, or are you seeing, different trends there?
I hope so. I mean, I hope this is something that's top of mind for folks both on the investing ecosystem and those building companies. But again, I'm totally sympathetic to the founder journey, which is so hard, getting product market fit, hiring, that key employee in a really competitive process. And so that's where finding partners to help you think about this broader set of questions about how you bake these value systems in your company early is really where I think the VCs and angel investors can help.
And while we're on the topic of values, a thing that I've been thinking about over the last few months has been this idea of Saudi Arabian investment money and how widespread it is in the Valley, and whether or not entrepreneurs actually care about where the money that their investors' money comes from. And so I guess I'm curious, have you seen that at all? I mean, there's been a lot of people who are like, whatever, who cares? I don't know. And that's a little disappointing to me because I think that it is important, but I'd be curious what you've seen.
I think we're living in an age now with much more transparency across the board about our industry.
It's not something that was ever top of mind 10 years ago. So.
And I think also this notion of what is the value system of the people we partner with. And again, for those of you building companies where your value system might be, I really want investors who have been founders, or I want investors who have been in the seat building companies and know the texture of the problems we're facing. Or you might say, I want investors who have a really global perspective because we want to bring those relationships and other assets to bear. You might say, I want to partner with someone who's built a diverse and inclusive team, and that's reflected in the makeup of who they employ. And so I think this is increasingly a conversation, and what that value system is for each company depends on the value system of each of you in this room, and that will be different But I think with more people asking those questions, I think that's a good thing.
How are you guys finding entrepreneurs outside of your networks? You guys are all, you're based here primarily, right? And like you have your networks here, and you've all sort of come up in a lot of big valley companies. How are you guys going outside of that to find investment opportunities?
Yes, we mentioned a decade ago, I described venture in the industry still as a sort of cottage community. That is just absolutely not the case anymore. Entrepreneurship is a global phenomenon, has always been a global phenomenon, but access to capital has historically been limited to essentially one zip code in the world, which just makes no sense. So we're a firm that focuses on both North America and Europe. So we have colleagues in London, we have folks in Boston, we have folks in New York here, and then many people that work remotely. I think that just is, at this point, like such an inevitability that companies are going to be built in geographies all over the world. I just led an investment at the end of last year that hasn't been announced yet, but the team I'm backing is building a fully remote distributed team. And this is a serial entrepreneur who has fantastic networks, could have built and scaled a company in San Francisco, but chose not to.
And why?
Because one, the cost of living in San Francisco has created a really difficult environment to scale and build a company, particularly if you want to be able to hire people who are not financially privileged, which I think is really important. And second, the access to talent. Most of the time, all of you, how many of you right now would say that like hiring is your number one like pain point as an entrepreneur? Quite a number of hands, and that means that like the amount of time that you're spending like meeting engineers or folks is a huge part of your business. This entrepreneur told me, you know what, since we're building a remote team, our ability to access great talent and close great talent is just transformed the way he now spends his time.
Is there something lost there? Because, I mean, for the longest time, VCs don't want to get on planes, so they're hesitant to invest outside of San Francisco, but B, they believe that, a company culture can't be built remotely. But I agree. I'm also increasingly seeing really interesting companies that are either fully remote or they, open a second office in a different, like, second-tier city almost immediately, and that's how they create their culture. But so is there a risk in that?
I'm sure there is, and this ecosystem is full of experiments. Like all of these companies, including the one I mentioned, it's early, so we'll see. But I backed the company because I believe in what they're doing in the founder. But I also think there's reason to believe. Listen, the tools have gotten so much better. So whether you're using Slack or Zoom or Google Hangouts, you can communicate and collaborate really easily. And I think I'm curious to see what this fully distributed, if that becomes more of the norm, because I think the benefits may outweigh the risk there. But we'll see, we'll see.
A similar trend that we had discussed earlier that I want to talk about is that companies are going global earlier. You had talked a little bit about China, and I'm just not worried, but just curious about this because I think we saw this happen before with Groupon, with Fab.com, with a lot of companies that they suddenly had a lot of copycats and they were like, we got to go global now, and it ended up being a big reason for their struggles. And so is it different now, or are we heading toward that same kind of situation?
I think each generation of startups sort of stands on the shoulders of those that came before. And there is now a playbook that was written by Uber and Lyft and many others about how do you scale a business globally that has a local market by market launch playbook.
I don't know if everybody wants to follow the Uber playbook.
Fair enough, and there's lessons to be learned there too. But I do think you have people coming out of those companies now starting or joining these companies.
Are you guys, just as an aside, are you guys investing in Uber, Airbnb, mafia type, entrepreneurs that are coming out of there? Maybe that's a wrong word.
I think there's a great talent pool coming from those companies and many others. I think it will be interesting to see too as this current group of companies matures, where those folks go on to join startups or start companies. But I think there's a group of people now that has an expertise in here's how we go to market and launch in different geographies, and that's allowing this next generation of companies to scale more quickly. So at Twitter, I went and opened our office in London, which was our first European. It was really our first European outpost 4 or 5 years after the company was founded. And now you look at the hyper growth companies. Within 2 years of founding, Lime, as an example, is in 100 different cities, in 15 different countries. And so the only way to put a playbook like that into place is to leverage talent and people that have done that before, or have that operating experience.
That's a really interesting company to watch as well. So we just have a few minutes left. So I want to ask you about what sectors you're excited in. And you spent 9 years at Twitter. You obviously understand social media and consumer internet companies very well. But I'm curious, is that area still ripe for investment, or is that dead? Can you guys are you seeing interesting things there? Companies even bothering to try to go up against Facebook?
Yeah, I think the next generation of social networks and communities is going to have an online-offline component. And I'm really interested to meet founders building companies in this space. I think we've largely saturated our purely online communities. And I would be delighted to be wrong here if you're building something in that space. But I've been so excited and inspired to see people rethinking physical space and how we create communities and how we create networks.
Any examples of that you can share?
I think The Wing is doing an amazing job with this. Yep. I'm not an investor, I'm just a fan. I've seen people, reimagining co-living and how you find an apartment, or how we design the spaces for that we live in. And I'm excited to see people reimagine that for communities or populations that historically have been somewhat overlooked by entrepreneurs. As an example, there's so many companies rethinking how millennials live and work, but we have this incredible aging baby boomer population. And you look at nursing homes or assisted care facilities, and you imagine what we could build there and what that might look like. And so I think that online-offline combination for social networks has a lot of promise.
I'm curious also, given that mobile is arguably kind of over as an investment. All of these companies that are about to go public from this wave of unicorn investment have basically grown on the back of mobile. I don't know if there's a lot of opportunity left there or not, but I know investors are casting about for the next platform. VR was maybe going to be it. AI. It's not really clear what that is. Do you have any theories on what the next platform could be?
In terms of secular trends, it's not exactly a platform, but this changing nature of work, I think, is going to be one of those massive tidal waves shaping the country and really shaping the world. What I mean by that is this shift towards on-demand, software-enabled marketplaces that help you with a given skill set or profession find a way to perform a job or a task and get paid for that. Estimates are that something like 50% of the U.S. workforce in the next 5 years will somehow be involved in independent gig or contract-based work. And so I think that shift is going to be pretty profound in terms of what are the companies that are built there, and also how do we do that in an ethical way that creates economic opportunity for a broader group of people.
Any examples you can highlight there? Too early to...
We've invested in GV has invested in a company called Swing Education, which is a marketplace that helps substitute teachers find ways to plug into schools that on short notice need someone there. And I think there's a whole crop of companies coming up now that I'm actively looking at.
Okay, we have exactly 1 minute left, and I really want you to talk about this one thing because it's very, very important, especially to an audience of entrepreneurs. Could you explain in 1 minute what the gap table is and why companies should be aware of it?
Yes. I co-founded a group called #Angels 4 years ago, and we published research last year about the diversity of the cap table. So when you all are building your companies and financing your companies and hiring people, you're giving them equity in your business. And we would love to see the industry become more diverse and inclusive, not just in who you hire, but really in who's represented in the ownership structure of these businesses, because that, we think, is going to enable us long-term to build a more diverse and inclusive industry if more people participate in the financial upside of what we're all building. And our research suggested that 9% of founder and employee equity is held by women. We weren't able to look at intersectionality, race, non-binary, gender, because we didn't have the data, but those are very important parts of this story. But we think creating more diverse and inclusive economic opportunity and wealth creation is really important in our industry and something we're committed to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Just
right
really.
Thank you.